This American novel sold the most copies in the 19th century, in the 1800s. It was turned into traveling theater plays that traveled around the country and put on performances based on this book. It had an enormous historical impact. The book I'm talking about is Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Abraham Lincoln is purported to have said, it's probably apocryphal, probably didn't really happen, but when Harriet Beecher Stowe met Abraham Lincoln, which did happen, Abraham Lincoln was reported to have said, "So this is the little woman who started this great war." And Senator Charles Sumner did say that if there had been no Uncle Tom's Cabin, there would be no Lincoln in the White House. This book had a huge impact on how especially white Americans viewed the institution of slavery. And it was really written in response to the passage of the Fugitive Slave Law that required Northerners to return fugitive slaves to the South. So Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote this book to talk about the conditions of slavery and what that meant. This book is highly melodramatic and also has come under a lot of valid criticism, but you cannot deny the powerful effect that it had on audiences. So how did it achieve this effect? So one of the reasons that Uncle Tom's Cabin has come under criticism, and even the current use of the term Uncle Tom, is used to mean a Black person who is accommodating to white people or overly solicitous to white people to the detriment of other Black people. And that is definitely an apt description of Uncle Tom. He is a character who is kind of a paragon of what Stowe considers to be the Christian virtues. So, that whole passage about turn the other cheek, where Jesus says, if somebody strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other cheek, so he may strike you there also. So that's a pretty convenient message to give to slaves if you're a slave owner. And this is kind of the approach that Uncle Tom takes to life. He has complete faith in his Lord Jesus Christ, and that Jesus has put him where he is for a reason. And so when Tom gets sold from his rather kind and benign master to a slave trader to be taken south, he just passively goes along with it. And that works out for him for a while. He gets sold to another master who is also pretty benign. That's another valid reason to criticize this book. There's a lot of benign slaveholders in this book, and it definitely romanticizes the institution of slavery while it's also criticizing it heavily. But Stowe really makes her point when Tom's second master dies and he is sold to the vicious Simon Legree, who buys Tom to be an overseer of other slaves. But Tom refuses to whip other slaves, and so Simon has him whipped until he dies. Tom's only real act of disobedience throughout the whole story is that he refuses to beat or whip other slaves, and he also refuses to give up the location of two slaves who escaped Simon Legree. And so for that, he gets beaten to death. But other than that, he always is perfectly obedient and loyal. What Tom is definitely not as a role model for Black people in America. But we can understand Tom's function a lot better when we understand melodrama. Tom's function is to be the passive, virtuous victim who is so virtuous that he is not even willing to stand up for himself, only to stand up for other people, and not to do so violently or resist in any way. And so he displays this complete, perfect virtue throughout the whole story. We might debate whether it's virtuous, but in the paradigm that Stowe is writing in, it's perfect virtue. And for that virtue, he is brutally beaten to death. So this arouses the sympathy of the white audience. But by contrast, there's another set of characters in this novel who take the role of the active hero. At the same time that Tom is sold, another slave from the same plantation, Eliza, has a son who is also sold to the same slave trader. Eliza does not go passively. She decides to escape and bring her son with her. And so does her husband, George Harris. So Eliza and George and Eliza's son, Henry, all escape and eventually make their way to the north, and then to Canada, and then to Africa. Stowe is not 100% saying that being like Tom is the way you should be. She is saying that in an ideal world, we should all be like Tom, but under the system of slavery, being like Tom gets you killed. So the point she's trying to make is that perfect Christian virtue is not compatible with the system of slavery. And so George Harris, who a couple times in the story has to be talked down from killing his master or fighting and killing white people who are trying to capture him, he's a much more fiery kind of an individual. And while, Stowe puts in some criticisms of that, he's the one who actually gets out. He and his wife, Eliza, and their son.